friendships that I made in the West Bank, and I'll get to that in a second. But first, I'll just say, believe it or not, I'm not Palestinian. The fact that I was able to learn about the struggle that I'm going to tell you about has everything to do with the generosity and the connections that the people who live in the village of Nabi Saleh were able to facilitate. And really, I would just say, it's not just their generosity, although Palestinians are rightly known for their generosity. It's also that many of my friends have an international perspective, and it's part of their political goals to connect with people who are trying to change things around the world, because as my friend Bassem Tamimi says, the next intifada has to be global and it has to be against capitalism. So that was the first thing I heard him say, and I decided I got to get to know this guy. So anyway, I know I've probably wasted too much time here. Last year, you might not know, there was a major strike of teachers in Palestine. It lasted 1 month. It involved 35,000 public school teachers. That is analogous to the K through 12 system. It saw some of the largest demonstrations, in fact, the largest demonstration certainly against the Palestinian Authority. It was met with unprecedented level of repression, including, people may have seen in the news, roadblocks, checkpoints to stop teachers from getting to demonstrations by the Palestinian Authority. And of course, all of this is happening under Israeli occupation. The strike was massive and very participatory. But the outcome, in fact, was no great victory. People won basically the demand to maintain the status quo, which had been one of their major demands. So what was the strike over in 2013? There was an agreement on wages and conditions made between the official union and the Palestinian Authority. And that agreement was reneged upon in the last years. And teachers were very angry about this. Teaching in Palestine is a terrible, terrible situation. Every teacher has to have at least one second job, either at a cafe. A lot of them drive taxis. It's almost impossible to grade, impossible to spend time thinking about your students, and it's just a terrible situation. So to have the minimal, horrible agreement reneged upon was too much, and people went on strike. So I went to try to talk to the teachers and learn what their story was, and what I learned was very impressive. The strike was actually organized not through the official union, but over the head of the union. The official union, the GUPT, General Union of Palestinian Teachers, is very much a creature of the Palestinian Authority. It had been imposed on teachers from the PLO as it came back from exile back in the days of the beginning of the Oslo Agreement. And in fact, the GUPT had been opposed since that time by a number of very active militant teachers who have at various times tried to work with the union, but for the most part remained outside of it. And those teachers were the leaders of this strike. When the strike happened, it was to a great degree a response by the teachers themselves, and a demonstration was called in Ramallah, and it was there that the historic militants of the teachers' movement gave it a perspective. They said everybody should go back to their governorate, it's the localities in the West Bank, send 2 to 3 representatives from every school, and we'll have a central committee to organize the strike. And this is the way that the strike was organized, and this committee structure facilitated participation on an incredible level. People organized their own demonstrations, their own actions, far too many for me to go through at this time. And in fact, I think people really, as the strike went on, came to the conclusion that unless they had some way out of the political situation imposed by the occupation, there wasn't much they could do, and so they demobilized. But this was very different than demobilizing without a democratic discussion and organization. As one woman teacher told me, she said, yeah, we demobilized, we accepted this, the agreement to hold, to come back to the terms, even though we had this massive strike, but we're keeping the coals hot under the ashes. So I have many thoughts about the barriers that people were up against, because really the problem is a double level problem of the Palestinian Authority and the occupation beyond it. And in fact, I think that many of those problems can't be solved within the boundaries of the occupied territories. And that was a discussion I had with the leading militants, and it was very interesting, but I don't have time to go into it here. I think things that we can learn, because I saw many parallels with struggles I've seen, that I've been a part of, that friends of mine have been a part of in the past and in other countries. I think we can see the incredible importance of self-activity, the fact that the committee structure gave people a venue to organize themselves. But self-activity is not spontaneous activity. The self-activity required the perspective presented by the known militants who had been active for many years and had won the respect of their colleagues. And even though this strike was an incredible success on the organizational level, it posed broader political problems, and ultimately all that people could win was a return to the status quo. But again, as that teacher said, the coals are still hot, and when the coals are hot, you can light a fire again. So I don't want to take any more time. I'll leave it for questions later. There you go.
Yo lo voy a interpretar, me da como 3 oraciones y me da una pausa para entonces yo continuar. I'm going to be interpreting consecutively, so she'll speak, she'll give me a pause, and then I'll interpret, and we'll go back.
Bueno, buenas tardes a todas y a todos.
Buenas tardes.
Vengo de la Coordinadora Nacional de los Trabajadores de la Educación, la CNTE de México.
Good evening, good afternoon, everybody. ¿Su nombre?
Mi nombre es Guadalupe Luquín.
My name is Guadalupe Luquín, and I'm from the National Coordinating Council of Education Workers in Mexico.
Nosotros les comentaba hace un momento que formamos parte de una organización que es la disidencia del CNTE, que es el Sindicato Nacional de los Trabajadores de la Educación, pero dado que no había respuesta por parte del CNTE, ni se sentía el respaldo hacia los trabajadores, se decide en el año de 1979 iniciar con esta coordinación y empezar a partir de ahí a diseñar un plan de acción que es el que nos ha mantenido hasta el momento.
And we're part of the overall larger National Union of Educators, but because we didn't feel that we were supported, in 1979 we began coordinate our own coordination through the council to take action, and that's what's been sustaining us up through the present.
En el 2012 se aplica lo que fue la llamada reforma educativa, que en realidad no es una reforma educativa, sino es una reforma administrativa y laboral, que lo que busca es la desaparición de la escuela pública y acabar con los derechos como trabajadores de la educación.
And in 2012, what was proposed and came in was a so-called education reform, and it's truly not an education reform. It's more of an administrative and a labor reform that's really with the intention of shutting down public education and doing away with workers' rights.
La parte esta de la reforma educativa es como la conclusión de todas las intenciones que se han tenido desde los años 90, cuando entran los tratados internacionales de modernización o los tratados internacionales pues que empiezan a partir de los diferentes países.
And this reform is sort of the conclusion to what was happening in the 90s with the different international treaties that were taking effect at that point.
Como sabemos que es una reforma que atenta contra nuestros derechos y que busca privatizar la educación pública, los maestros a partir del 2012, principalmente en el 2013, iniciamos con una movilización que se viene acrecentando hasta el 2016, porque vienen queriendo implementar una evaluación universal o una evaluación que nos estandariza a todos y que no nos permite tener como elementos para poder formarnos como maestros, sino más bien es como el gancho que ellos tienen para aniquilar nuestros derechos como trabajadores.
And what's really happening with this reform is that it's going against workers' rights, and it's trying to privatize everything. And what's been happening is that teachers since 2012, 2013 in particular, began mobilizing, and that's grown up until 2016. What they are trying to impose is a universal evaluation system and a standardization that doesn't really allow us to band together as educators and as workers.
El gobierno no tiene elementos para poder sostener la reforma educativa o la viabilidad de ella, más que el único argumento que tienen es la represión y darnos una respuesta que es golpearnos completamente a los trabajadores a tal grado de que llegamos a tener en el país trabajadores que cayeron en la lucha, trabajadores que están cesados, algunos actualmente, y bueno, esta parte.
Okay. And really they're trying to annihilate our public education system. And the government doesn't really have the elements to sustain this. It's not viable. Their only reason is to repress and beat us down. And, you know, we've had a lot of workers who have succumbed to this and that have been laid off and are currently laid off because of this.
Los maestros de la coordinadora logramos un gran consenso con la sociedad, pero ante esto, bueno, el gobierno busca, la salida que tiene es, insisto, la represión y no dar la apertura para anteponer el diálogo ante cualquier otra situación que ellos están implementando sobre nosotros.
And even though the coordinating council of teachers has really, found consensus and agreement with the community, the government has really put a stop to any sort of dialogue that could be happening.
Y bueno, desde esa lucha que hemos venido dando en las calles, porque nos hemos aglutinado todos en la Ciudad de México, que es la parte central, teniendo marchas masivas y actividades políticas de gran importancia, los logros más importantes que hemos tenido es que nos hemos podido ir articulando de una forma más amplia, no solamente los que estábamos como parte de la CNTE, sino los compañeros que se quedaron siempre en el CNTE, empezaron a entender que la reforma es lesiva y se sumaron a la lucha, así es que se hizo más amplia la participación en las calles.
And really this struggle, throughout all of this, we've been demonstrating, we've done a lot of marches in Mexico City and large-scale actions, including political actions that have been very important. And it's allowed us to be visible and in a large scale, and it's also been fed by other educators who remained part of the overall national union but have seen that the reform is detrimental, and so they've added their participation to this.
Nosotros consideramos como un logro importante que la evaluación que se tenía pensada para el despido masivo de trabajadores de la educación la hemos venido deteniendo a gran medida y este hecho ha repercutido en que, bueno, el gobierno pues se queda sin elementos, pero buscan de alguna otra forma seguirnos reprimiendo y han implementado parte de una represión administrativa o de seguir fortaleciendo proyectos que tienen que ver pues con cómo rescatan ellos esa reforma que ya está vencida. Y en los días pasados, después del 2016, se han puesto varios periodos de evaluación y los maestros no han asistido a las evaluaciones. Entonces eso es un golpe que nosotros le hemos estado dando a dicha reforma.
And, we consider that what has been the weapon to use against us has been these evaluations that would lead to massive layoffs of educators, and we've largely stopped that or detained it. And so this has caused the government to lose some of the strength that they have for this, but they still continue looking for ways to respond and to continue forward with their reform. They, place value on projects that would really work to restore this education reform, and anything that sort of beats us back down. But recently, when there was evaluations proposed, educators didn't attend these evaluations, so we've been able to kind of beat back all of this.
Ajá. El señalamiento que le hicimos a la evaluación pues ha sido muy importante, ¿no? Ahora el gobierno también ha buscado sus medios tramposos para seguir implementando dicha evaluación. Y ahora en este periodo que en México hay vacaciones de Semana Santa, se implementó otra vez la convocatoria al examen, pero no es tiempo ni es forma de que se esté llamando a los maestros. Pero otra vez más, los maestros no se presentan, y hoy en un comunicado que se empieza a circular ya en las redes sociales, se está diciendo que la SEP dice y acepta que no se sienten competentes para poder seguir avanzando en el tema de la evaluación. Entonces hoy nos queda más que claro que le estamos dando una vez más un golpe y que no va a pasar pues su evaluación y su reforma.
And one of the things we've pointed out is sort of the trickery that the government has used. For example, right now everybody's on vacation in Mexico due to Holy Week, and they tried to set up these exams and evaluations during this time. And today there was a press release that's been circulating on social media that they no longer feel competent to hold these evaluations. So it's another way that we've been able to beat this back down.
Bueno, ante todo esto, ellos siguen insistiendo en su reforma privatizadora, y prueba de ello es que recientemente sacan lo que es el modelo educativo, el nuevo modelo educativo, que ni es nuevo modelo ni es educativo, más bien es una cuestión muy demagógica de un discurso doble que intenta sí llegar a la privatización de la educación. ¿Cómo lo intentan hacer? A partir de varios programas de financiamiento directamente con las empresas privadas. Uno de ellos sería, por mencionar, las escuelas al 100. Otro programa es Escuela Aprende 2.0, que tiene que ver con implementar todo un software educativo dentro de la educación. Y un tercero es el modelo dual, que se está implementando para el nivel superior y el nivel medio superior. Todos ellos ya con acuerdos directos con empresas privadas o con todas aquellas todas aquellas que se dedican pues a trabajo empresarial de forma privada.
And despite all this, the government continues insisting on privatization. They call this, a new education reform that's modernizing, and it's neither pro-education and it's not modern. It's really preaching privatization, and the government has continued to go ahead with privatizing and bringing in business, and among the things that they're doing is, for example, Education 2.0, which is implementing software for education purposes, and also a dual curriculum for high schools and intermediate schools. And they've continued to forge agreements with private businesses to carry all these things out.
Tenemos nosotros claridad de cuál es esa intención que tienen y cómo se vinculan pues con estas instituciones privadas, y bueno, pues ante eso nosotros anteponemos que es importante seguir articulándonos y seguir dando una lucha no solamente dentro de nuestro país, sino abrir fronteras y dar una lucha a nivel continente, porque sabemos pues que todas estas imposiciones vienen o dependen de los grandes capitales o las grandes oligarquías, y eso nos involucra a todos a participar dentro de esta lucha. Nosotros tenemos voy a comentar una cuestión muy local. Dentro de nuestra sección 18 de la CNTE venimos construyendo. Ajá.
And we are clear in what these links are with private businesses, and we have to continue this struggle, not just in our country, but go outside of the boundaries and on a continental level, because we know this is coming from capitalism, and we have to continue making it our struggle. And I want to mention something that's very particular to our local situation.
Para cerrar, el tiempo es muy mínimo, pero bueno, les comentaba, nosotros tenemos una propuesta. Además de seguir con la lucha política en las calles, creemos que es necesario cambiar todos los planes y todos los programas que se vienen implementando y que apuntan pues a la privatización y que siguen quitándonos el derecho como seres humanos a tener la libertad de estar en nuestra propia tierra. Entonces, para eso nosotros pensamos en un programa educativo que nos dé la posibilidad de ir cambiando las ideologías desde nuestros propios niños, ir construyendo pues desde los pequeños la idea de lo que se va a hacer cuando sean adultos, ¿no? Pero no pensando a los seres humanos como mano de obra barata, sino más bien como seres humanos integrales que puedan aportarle a esta sociedad. Y traje unos materiales como muestra de lo que se viene desarrollando en nuestra sección, material para los niños y material para los maestros también, porque creemos que es importante la formación, no solamente la actualización como la vienen promoviendo todos esos planes que tienen que ver con la reforma y que bueno, no nos aportan grandes elementos.
And, you know, we have a proposal that's aside from the political fight that we continue having, and it's to change really the program and the perspective that people have because these things are seeking really to take away our rights to be able to remain in our country. And so we have to change the ideas that people have, starting from the youngest children, and the idea of what they want to do when they grow up, not just to prepare them to be cheap labor. And so this really focuses on what they can contribute to society. And we have materials for both teachers and for students.
Para cerrar nada más, hay una frase que me gusta mucho, me gustaría retomar en este momento, la escuché en algún momento de Marta Harnecker, que dice que la política es soñar con hacer posible lo imposible. Después entendí que era tiene sus orígenes con Fidel Castro, y es una frase que ojalá y podamos retomar y saber que sí es posible continuar en esta lucha y que nos necesitamos unidos para poder transformar esa realidad y hacer posible lo que a veces vemos como imposible.
La cita era de quién? De Marta Hanecker. And I want to just conclude with a phrase from Marta Hanecker, and it says that politics is really to make a reality of something that is not possible. And I really want us to be a part of the catalyst for this change.
So much to discuss as we move into questions, but next up is
Okay. Hi everyone. My name is Felipe Gonzalez. I did my PhD here at Berkeley. I've been doing research for the past 5 years about education in Chile, about what are the origins of a pretty much market-based educational system in Chile, what are the consequences of that, and how the student movement that arose in 2011 basically attempted to change those institutions. So I'll try to tell you in a few minutes the Chilean experience with a market-based educational system, what are the problems that we see in it, and what the student movement has been doing in the past 5 to 6 years. So basically the Chilean market-based educational system has its origins in the Pinochet dictatorship that ruled the country between 1973 and 1990. After the coup and the brutal human rights violations that happened in the 70s, basically technocrats associated with the right-wing party in Chile saw an opportunity to basically advise the dictatorship and implement a set of really pretty radical reforms. And one of those radical reforms was in educational institutions. Basically, in 1980, the Pinochet regime installed a market-based educational system, pretty much anchored in what we would call, or what people are calling nowadays in the United States, the freedom to choose based on vouchers. And it's now, 37 years, and the system is pretty much unchanged. And it's pretty much unchanged basically because the opposition coalition had to negotiate a way out of the dictatorship. And one of those negotiations was that the policy platform implemented by the Pinochet dictatorship in the 1980s was basically going to be pretty much unchanged. As you might know, Pinochet itself, he remained as part of the army in the 1990s, so there's pretty much a threat of unrest in the case the opposition coalition, the new democratic government in the 1990s, tried to actually change the policy platform. So that was basically what happened kind of like in the 1990s. And what we see that actually happened is that there's a lot of distortions associated with a kind of like market-based educational system that was implemented in the 1980s. And you know, the system is pretty much anchored, in, like I said before, in both vouchers and freedom to choose. And a lot of the system is fed up by what we nowadays call standardized testing. Okay, and the standardized testing has a lot of problems with it. And one of the things is that basically schools, basically because they live in this with these competitive pressures from other schools and basically students that are trying to choose among different schools, there are a lot of perversive incentives, how we would say, to try to game the system. So we observe, for example, that schools basically manipulate test day attendance of the day of the test of the standardized test to basically create distortions in what are the test scores of their students and signal that they have better quality. So that's like a very simple thing that some of the schools do, not all of them do it, and that creates a lot of distortions. So for example, the government uses this standardized testing to allocate bonuses to teachers. But we know nowadays that because those signals that are being used to allocate bonuses to teachers that are supposed to reward the best teachers are basically guided by this like test day attendance that is completely manipulated by professors, by teachers at high schools and primary schools. So we know that that happens. We also know that, for example, the media and the government try to rank schools in the system based on these standardized tests, basically to try to signal to parents what are the best schools and what are the worst schools in the system. So we know that because of this test day attendance as well, we know that the information that is out there and it's like being used by both parents and the government and several other institutions is completely distorted. So we know that this information causes parents to actually choose the schools that are wrong based on this. Even if you think that this is a performance measure that we care about, it's completely distorted and parents are using it to basically like choose schools for the kids, right? So these are just some of the distortions that are in the system. These are two pretty obvious ones, but there's many other distortions that are associated with this. And the basic reason for this is that when you try to anchor a market-based educational system in this kind of rules or in this kind of like in this kind of setup, there's always going to be incentives to do things that are not intended to do. And this has been a research in the field of economics for the past 50 years, basically trying to argue that you can only think about something like what economists call invisible hand in markets, and there are very certain and a specific set of conditions. And basically none of those conditions are met in an educational system. So we shouldn't be surprised at all that all of these distortions appear in market-based educational systems. So after all these years and after basically no changes by the new democratic governments in the past 27 years, and all these externalities and all these distortions that we've observed, we've also observed an increasing segregation across the country. So this is a very basic consequence when you give people freedom to choose and people have different opportunities to choose among available options just because, for example, there are different prices, like school fees are different, so not everyone has the opportunity to go to the same set of schools. We observe increasing segregation. That's obviously something that's been clear in the Chilean case, and that's also a consequence of giving freedom to choose when there is unequal opportunities for people. So based on all these distortions and the increasing segregation that we observed in the past 3 decades, there's been an organization of a student movement. It began as a student movement for the first time in 2006, basically to try to reform the educational institutions and the rules of the game that have been prevalent in the system since the 1980s. So the first attempt to change those rules of game in the 2006 student movement, it wasn't that much of a success. So the unwillingness of the incumbent government to actually provide radical reforms to the initial radical reforms that the Pinochet dictatorship implemented created some sort of like negotiations between the student movement and the incumbent government that end up basically nothing. So it didn't create the reform that the student movement was trying to make. And as a consequence of that, in 2011, we observed another bigger and stronger, I would say, student movement that again tried to provide radical reforms to the institutional rules of the games in the educational institutions. So after that, there were again negotiations by the incumbent government at the time and the student movement to try to finally reform the system, and that they didn't came to an agreement again. So this is where I think the discussion becomes interesting. So what can you do when there's a large set of the population that wants radical change to institutions, and basically the incumbent government is unwilling to make those radical reforms? And this is where, I don't know, I think it's an interesting time to observe what's going on in Chile, because what we've been observing in the past 5 years is kind of like an institutionalization of the movement, in the sense that a lot of these kids that were participating in the movement and a lot of the a number of people that were associated to the movement trying to reform the system basically started to realize that there was no way to exert pressure on the incumbent government to really provide the radical reforms that they wanted. So what happened is that they started to create these new political movements, now trying to reform the system from within institutions. So nowadays we observe that a lot of these people that were participating in the student movement have attempted to become the incumbent government in a way, by running to become mayors, by running to become congressmen and congresswomen. And some of them are even thinking about running the presidential elections. And we've seen like this huge movement of this huge creation of new political parties that basically arose from this student movement and the failure, I would say, of creating the radical reforms that they actually wanted. So nowadays, in the next couple of elections that you would see, there's a big Congress and presidential election in November of this year. We're gonna really see the kind of like success that these new political parties associated arose in the student movement of 2006 and 2011, if they can or basically cannot achieve the change that they want from within institutions.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I've been listening to the presentations all morning and also the panel here, and I'm seeing the common ground that the crisis in education, as we are seeing, is actually, from my perspective, from what I'm hearing, is a reflection of the crisis of the system that we are in. It's the crisis of capitalism that reflects in the whole education system. And I'm sorry to say that now I'm going to up all the speakers to go more backwards to present you a more darker picture of what's happening. As Rosa Luxemburg said, you know, it's either socialism or barbarism. I think we are at the barbarism age. In Turkey, again, let me emphasize that you cannot look at education without looking at the political system. And Turkey is yet one other neo-colonial country that when you have a crisis in the center of capitalism, the neo-colonials experience it 100 times more. And the reflection of this in education is actually 100 times more. Today, as we are speaking here, Turkey has brought up martial law in Kurdish towns. Many of them have been there for like about 7-8 months. But in one town, there's a martial law today because the government is tearing down a 3-story building school because the school is teaching in the native language of Kurdish. We have to start from this point on why. Turkey is, like I said, a neo-colonial country. It's a NATO country. It's one of the best allies that the United States can have, together with Israel. And you can see the parallelism of the racism and religious bigotry in both countries, in that Kurds, 25% of the population, are not allowed to speak their own language. And this reflects in a big fight over education, because Kurds are saying that this is our native language, this is what I talk with my mother, but you won't allow that, although most of the schools teach German, English, French. But Kurdish is not allowed. So where did we come here? It has been a trend since the 1980s that the schools, the education system is not enough to do any education. But let me remind you, in order to even have a sensible education, you have to have hope. But now that the hope is even gone in the neo-colonials, why would you have a sensible education? what is happening is that since 1980s, the schools were not enough with 60 students or more in classrooms. So your education had to be done on private extra schools. Every student, every single student would go to school in the morning, and the schools would let them go at noon, and then they would go to a private school to continue for the rest of the day. And this opened this opened opportunity for the private schools to get their feet into the door. And one of the, and it thrived all over the country. Big, huge money maker for the privatization. But the guy who really benefited from this, and I'm going to come to his name, many of you may know him, is a Islamist terrorist. He works together with the government. Turkey is governed by 3 or 4 nodes. One is this guy, the private educator, terrorist, jihadist. Second one is the Turkish government. And the third one is the Europe, NATO. This is the governing group. Now, this educator completely got hold of the entire private education and made billions of Turkish liras, hundreds of millions of Turkish liras, dollars. But then his name got introduced into the terrorist, his name became known. And you know what happened? CIA flew him on a private plane to United States, and a CIA official called Graham Fuller gave him a recommendation letter so that he can live in Pennsylvania in a huge ranch protected by machine gun toting private guards. And Bill Clinton, while flying around the world, was asking world leaders to give this guy, his name is Fethullah Gulen, to allow him to open schools all over the world. And he has schools in more than 100 countries. But lately, countries have started to understand that these schools are not really schools, but they are spy centers. And they have been closing down. We have 2 schools in Oakland and Fremont here that he owns, by the way. Yet last year, 2016, if you paid taxes, you contributed to his budget by $60 million the United States have given to this terrorist. Now, the guy who brought him here, Graham Fuller, the CIA official, he is also the father-in-law of the Boston bomber. Just in case you may start to connect the dots. And he is actually the inventor of the term called moderate Islam in the Middle East. So these are the guys that are in the world controlling education. These are the guys that come to United States and have the biggest charter school in the United States, chain of charter schools. So this is what is happening as we speak right here and in Turkey and in the world. So privatization is big money, but more than the money, it is the politics. This guy, Fethullah Gülen, is bringing teachers, so-called teachers from Turkey to United States to teach your children English. I'm not kidding you. Turkish teachers are coming to United States to teach English to American students. But the game is like this. Whatever they get paid, they have to pay 3/4 of it to the Gülen's organization. So it's a volunteer, it's like a slave labor, and where the money is recycled and laundered. This is what is happening. But lately, Turkish president and Gülen fell apart. So Turkey has now took back his schools to prevent his making money. But guess what happened? The schools have now become government schools where they started teaching anti-science and religion. They are teaching religion. Just to show you the level that the education has gone through this whole process is that bright students who come up with scientific, innovation, there is a government institution that gives them grants. Several projects in biotechnology, in computers, in space research, in biology have all been rejected, where these students later on came to the United States and they got grants from NASA and other institutions for their projects. These projects were all rejected, and the #1 project last year that was given grant by this authority in Turkey is a bread box, that when you open the lid, a light comes on. So this is the level our education is now being forced to. But again, we have to look at why this is happening. So capitalism is in crisis, and this crisis comes to a level where it cannot even provide hope. So at this time, we go down to the dark ages and start teaching religion as the alternative. But what has happened in the last is that 120,000 public workers were dismissed from their positions in the last several months because they do not agree with the government. That's the only reason. And out of this, we have 80,000 positions open for teachers, 80,000. And we have about, if I'm not mistaken, 40 or 50,000 graduates who are waiting to be assigned to these positions. But no, they are not being assigned there. You know who is? Turkey is now the gateway of the Syrian refugees. But those refugees, although there are families and people who are running away from the war, but most of them are the Islamic terrorists, ISIS terrorists that Turkey supports for United States, and they need some place where they could be fed and paid. So they have come to Turkey. Now 20,000 of Syrian ISIS terrorist fighters are now being given educational positions. They don't know one single word of Turkish, and they will be teaching in the Turkish schools. Now, on top of this, out of that 120,000 who were dismissed, 330 academicians have been fired from their positions because they signed a letter saying, we will not be a part of this crime. The crime being that Turkey is now demolishing, completely bombing with tanks, with heavy armory, the Kurdish towns. So the academicians said, we are not going to be part of this. So 380 of them, actually 330, now 80, have been fired. And not only fired, but they are not allowed to work anywhere else in the academic system. Not only that, but they cannot even be an editorial in one of the academic publications. So we have come all the way here. We cannot understand what's happening in education if we don't understand the crisis that's happening in a neocolonial and in a broader sense in a capitalist system. Capitalism has no hope. It cannot give any hope. So instead of giving the people hope, like in the central, the metropolitan countries, you can still sell hope. But in neocolonials, you can't even do that anymore. So this is why the barbarism is upon us in education. And let me see. Oh yeah, out of the 120,000 people who were fired, 40 people have committed suicide. In the last 3 months, 2 academicians have committed suicide. So this is the gravity of the system. And tomorrow there's gonna be a referendum in Turkey. It could be very bloody because the government, the choice is only yes or no. If you vote yes, you mean that every single power of the government and the state gets into the one hand, one president. If there is a no, it means that's not. And the government has promised attacks. And if you campaign for no, you go to prison. Turkey is the #1 country, our ally. #1 country that they have the most journalists in prison. Even if on private papers you write to support the no vote, you go to prison, you get fired. So in this situation, I don't know where the education is going to go, but it is definitely from the privatization, you can see the path down to the barbarism that we are going with. I'll just stop there and maybe answer questions. Thank you.
Javier Cordova, I understand that they might be joining us.
Had three champions of mathematics in the world. Who knows this? From North Korea, high school. And I talked to their teachers and I talked to the students. They were very curious about how the schools are in the United States. And yeah, I tried to explain. They would shake their heads really, but it was an experience. But I do I agree with you. We should be more careful. I should be more careful when I say ours. But I just wanted to mention that United States government's best ally, one of the best allies is Turkey, and the United States does its dirty work through that. Like again, I'm going to emphasize this: helping ISIS. Wouldn't look good if United States were caught in it, although they were caught in many times. So the Turkey does that dirty work for United States. The entire weapons that came from Libya were shipped to Turkey for the Turkish government to send them over to ISIS. And only 2 hours before the US ambassador was killed in Libya, Turkish ambassador was striking deals with him on how to ship those weapons to the ISIS terrorists.